move on now to look at private equity investing. And obviously, Jochen, this is an area where you've got a fair bit of experience. But I mean, one of the most recent developments is this news earlier this year, creation of a Russian investment fund by the government with a very experienced private equity player, Kirill Dmitriev, at the head of it, to try to encourage more in the way of private equity investing in Russia. Jochen, do you see that as a significant step, or there are other things that need to happen to make that project a success?
Well, it was one of the, I can't say it's our brainchild, but it's one of the things anybody talking to foreign investors will come upon very quickly. You speak to the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, it almost sounds like a joke, but the truth is they always tell you, if I go to China, I go to Chinese region, they say, how can we help you? We co-invest 50% of whatever you do, we give you a tax cut, we give you the staff you need, we give you land. You come to Russian region, they say, what can you do for me? So one of the key points that we put forward to the government in the 2008 crisis was that we should have this sort of co-investment fund. And there was an initiative by the what's called the Quebec Institutional Investor Summit, where some of the largest pension and sovereign funds got around the table and said, we'd like to invest in Russia, we don't know how, we'd like to have a partner with whom to co-invest. Now our vision of this thing was, of course, and the foreign investors would have thought, to have an independent entity that is funded by the Russian government and funded by sovereign wealth funds globally, to have a fully captive private equity arm, i.e. having private equity that's actually government equity. That's of course going to be a bit difficult, I think. So it's, I think the final touches are quite important. So if in the end of the day the fund provides, for example, capital to the Baring was stocks and ourselves and others as a fund of fund, then you have foreign controlled or independently controlled asset management activities, private equity investments. If it is a state-owned entity, why should, for example, the state of Singapore co-invest with Russia to buy or build a road to Ukraine, whatever it is they want to do? So that's the problem. The problem is they're going to have to demonstrate how they're going to be really arm's length. But in principle, it's a great breakthrough and a very big success. I'm happy it happened. I wish them all the best of luck in attracting others into this pool, this big investment club. But you have to demonstrate, independence. You have to have a track record. You have the team that works together to come from scratch and do it. It's quite tough, I think.
Returning to Chris's point about the size of companies, there are only so many companies that are going to be able to afford an exit onto the for private equity investors onto the London Stock Exchange. So really, you really need to see that local exchange, the Russian exchange, the new MySex RTS, be a success. And then you'll see more capital coming into these funds. As long as it's basically driven by those 10 funds plus the oligarch funds, you're never really going to see any forward progress. I mean, I was in private equity in '98, and you're right, they're the same faces that I saw there in '98. And so really that's critical. The exchange has to address those issues which Chris brought up to attract local exits. And until that happens, it's not really going to go beyond 10.
But having said that, it's been a good year. I mean, we've been able to have 3 exits in 6 months, and there's interest, and the people are obviously now with all this capital thrown at the market. This valuations are going up again, and I think the private equity route can be quite attractive. Yeah. I think we may be seeing one of the first take private transactions with a large strategic buyer taking out a company from the market. So it's quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. Chris, just coming back to your company, and really I think it's something that John touched on here. Perhaps where there is a need in the market is that more sort of venture capital than private equity. It's the early stage, it's the sort of bridge to IPO financing. Is that the kind of thing that M.Video looked at before your IPO, or as you say, was it sufficiently cash generative?
Not just before the IPO, but after the IPO. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of pre-IPO funds. People that were coming in saying that we can help you do things and really leverage your business to make sure that the IPO is successful, because you got to show a lot of growth. And even after the IPO, people were coming in saying, look, we can put a lot of money into your company and you can consolidate the market, you can do this, you can do that, you can do the other thing. But people have built these businesses and it's what they do. So their risk appetite is a lot less. The pre-IPO funds, they come in and they say, you can do this, I'm willing to put in $100 million. For them, $100 million is, okay, and in a year I want $150 million back, and I'm going to drag you along and show you. But for these people that have invested their life into this company, it means success or failure. And failure by being too aggressive is too difficult. So they would rather go along and do what they're doing and do it the right way and pull things through and do the IPO and then potentially do a little bit of cashing out, grow the business with funds coming into the money through the equity side of things, get professional management in that helps them devise a proper strategy, whether that's consolidation or not, but do it on the basics and not do it, the venture capitalists, the pre-IPO funds, the equity people, they all take shortcuts. They all say, here's the money now, this is what we need to do. And I think it's too aggressive for most of the small businesses in Russia.
I think we've seen many very bitter cases where private equity firms, I think one record company in Russia had 13 deals and 12 bankruptcies.
Wow.
So that's an amazing, and of course that's a sad story for this one company, but it's even a sadder story for the 12 entrepreneurs. I know some of them, who were pushed by their private equity investor to take on leverage, be aggressive, all the way right into the crisis. So, in the end of the day, I think it's not the money that'll make you happy. It'll make, you have to have people and give them a solid job and, do something useful. And I think the leverage buyout model is actually dead in the West. It's lost its credibility, so why invent it in Russia?
I think we're going to move on to the M&A topic in a moment. Just before we do, just to come to you, Alexei, a little bit on this question of building companies up and preparing them for IPOs. Really, in Russia, the impression is that perhaps we haven't seen so many of the sort of startup to stock market stories that Chris's company represents. VTB Capital itself has actually been working with one or two of those, and we had Russian Navigation Technologies and so on IPOing last year. I mean, what do you think of is there also a question there in terms of, if you're like the more plain vanilla banking relationships as well, and the availability of credit for companies to help them build up to reach the kind of point where they can look at a stock market listing? Is that also a factor that's held back the development of the kind of startup to stock market process in Russia?
I think in the first place, the issue is that there is not that many medium-sized companies in Russia in the first place. If you look at the contribution of the medium-sized businesses to the GDP in Russia, it is ridiculously low. It's, according to the BRD, it's sort of 4% versus 15% in the Western and Central Europe. And the issue is more the red tape and all sorts of the corruption overhang in the economy, which actually delays the development of the businesses and maturity of the businesses and scaling up of the successful business models. And with respect to M.Video or Magnet are the exclusions which kind of confirm the general rule. So, but in terms of and the second thing is it's sort of a problem of chicken and egg, the valuation of the market. Actually, equity in Russia is an expensive form of financing for the companies. So the debt, at most of the time over the past 10 years, that was a much more preferred option. And earlier, back in, say, until year 2003, the returns were so high, the organic returns were so high that companies in the first place didn't need any external financing whatsoever. They just grew on the basis of the retained earnings. So until the debt gets more expensive, I think that the equity market will be to great extent used for the cash out reasons and putting a price tag on the equity for the including M&A activities rather than a genuine source of funding, and which actually limits the scope of the companies which are going into the public market in the first place.
And I mean, just touching on the questions of sort of corporate governance and some of the challenges of building up companies. Obviously, you've worked with some mid-cap companies looking to build them up. How serious, Russia has the sort of the reputation for problems with corporate governance and problems with corruption. In practical terms, do you actually hit upon those problems sometimes as an investor?
Yeah, all the time. I think 153rd place in Transparency International's ranking out of 180 is quite an achievement. You have to really try hard to get there. You know, it's a simple case. We are well, we've adopted the Transparency International standards of doing business, or our members, as staff members, are mainly CFA, or some of them CFA holders. They're committed to ethical business, so we haven't paid bribes, and we try to convince the companies we invest in not to do it either. And they think we're nuts. You know, they say you can build a pipeline straight through the forest for $500,000 kickback, and we're telling, well, you got to go around and build like this, but that costs $2 million. Why would you do that? That makes no sense. And you know, these are grown-up big guys that are our partners, and they scream at me and use all sort of language that I didn't use before in my life. And then, in the end of the day, we show them that you can now make, for example, public advertising for a dacha village outside of Moscow called Pushkin Les, because we haven't cut a corner. While for the other dacha village which they built themselves, they can never do public advertising, because as soon as they do, all the guys where they cut corners with, they can't, they'll extract more money from them. So I think Russia is changing. It's changing dramatically. I've taken me some courage to be openly critical about all the mess that exists, but I think that there's a commitment to change it. People are sick and tired. I have a grandmother-in-law, 90 years old, and she never used to talk politics because she's a victim of television propaganda. But this birthday, 90 years birthday, she started screaming about corruption for the first time. I think people are sick and tired, and I think in the information age, things will change. I see people standing up and complaining, so that's good news.